Before we open it to the floor, I'm going to invite Leni Wild on my left to say a word as a discussant and perhaps provoke some questions from you. Leni's a research fellow here at ODI. She's working particularly on governance, service delivery, aid, accountability and democracy promotion and support to fragile and post-conflict countries. She's conducted field work in Eastern Africa and parts of Asia. She's been a research fellow also at the Institute for Public Policy Research and a research officer at an NGO working in post-conflict countries. Leni, you have the floor.
Great, thank you very much.
You may need to have the mic a little bit closer.
Thank you. I mean, if I can just start by adding my congratulations to Karen and to Publish What You Fund for this important initiative. I think ODI was really pleased to be part of the launch, and we hope to continue to sort of collaborate with you and with your team on taking these issues forward and addressing some of the data gaps that I think you're really highlighting and are starting to plug. I don't want to take up too much time because I think the questions and the debate will be what's really important here. But I had a few comments and maybe a few issues to put to the panel around two key dimensions, I guess. First of all, understanding a bit more why donors may hold the rank that they do in this index. And secondly, sort of thinking about how we now start to go a bit further in terms of putting the principle of aid transparency into practice. First of all, I think, as Karen said, it's interesting that across all the categories, there's no, discernible sort of pattern in terms of bilaterals versus multilaterals, size, or how established donor agencies are. And I think instead it reflects a whole range of factors, but a big part of that are the governance structures, if you like, the political economy of different agencies, which shapes the level of tolerance and how far they can go on some of these indicators that they're looking at. The World Bank has a very long-standing commitment to issues of aid transparency, and that's partly because it has to report back to its members. The UK now, interestingly, has a very big political commitment to transparency, driven by a whole number of different imperatives. And some agencies, like some of the US agencies, are really constrained by their kind of bureaucratic system, their relationships with Congress and so on. So I think it's kind of helpful for us to maybe reflect on this index and how we can complement it by understanding why donors seem to be placed where they are. I think that helps us to think about the starting points of those agencies, whether different aspects of aid transparency are particularly hard for them, and therefore what you need to do to get to the political will issues in Karen's recommendations about how we improve on aid transparency. And then I think thinking about kind of this principle of aid transparency, and I would agree with Alex that it seems like there has been quite a shift across a whole number of agencies and in the public and political debate on these issues towards a much greater openness to aid transparency. I think this principle is increasingly accepted, and this index is really important in keeping the pressure up. And I think it means we're now in quite an interesting and exciting space of actually starting to think about some of the nuts and bolts about what does this look like in practice, on the ground, and for different users who want to make the most of this information. And to me, I think there's a few different levels. Thinking about the sort of the country level, I think it would be interesting to build up the data to see whether there are significant differences for individual agencies across different countries. The UK, from my own experience, actually is operating quite differently at country level on these issues in different parts of Africa, for example. But I think also the High Commissioner has given us a really rich picture of why information needs to not just be put out there, but to be given in ways which are accessible and usable by partner governments. I would add also by a whole number of other actors and institutions in developing countries, parliamentary bodies, civil society organisations and so on, who are really struggling to make sense of data even when it is put out. And I think in a way the proxy of IATI is good for now, but how do we start to really build up issues of and kind of measures of accessibility and the quality of information that donors are putting out? I think there's interesting discussions about fragile states and working in higher risk contexts. Do we ever do we think we need to moderate ever some of the standards or the approaches to aid transparency in higher risk environments? Are there different aspects which are particularly important and some which are less relevant or less feasible, particularly in the short term? And I think as a number of, particularly some of the donors who rank quite well on this index, start to increase their aid to fragile countries, it will be interesting to see if that affects their ranking on aid transparency. And then just a very final reflection is kind of thinking about the different audiences for aid information. In some ways, it's no surprise to see the UK currently kind of heading up at the top of the index because of the political commitment that it's made to transparency. But I think that is largely driven by imperatives to show results and value for money to the domestic audience. You know, are there tensions between the kinds of information that that audience is looking for and would like to see, and that which partner governments and others want to know and want to receive? So what sorts of information and in what sorts of formats are needed by the different stakeholders, and what might be some of the trade-offs or the tensions there, and how do we start to mitigate them? So, I mean, I think this is a really timely, it's a really important initiative, and one that, you know, I would definitely support fully. I think it's been crucial, and it is crucial for really embedding the principles of aid transparency, and now ODI and others, I think, would really welcome the opportunity to work with you to think about how do we start to really get down to these nitty-gritty issues about operationalising this principle to go further.
Thank you very much, Leni.